You're standing on the coldest, most desolate place on Earth. The wind howls at -70 degrees Celsius. Beneath your feet lies 4 kilometers of solid ice. And below that ice, hidden from sunlight for 15 million years, exists a secret that will change everything we know about life itself. Before we dive into this incredible journey, drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from, and whether you believe life could exist on other planets. Now, let me take you to the edge of human discovery. This isn't just another science story. This is about the moment when a team of determined researchers defied impossible odds, drilled through nearly 3 miles of ice in the most hostile environment imaginable, and discovered something so profound, so utterly shocking, that it forced us to rewrite the rules of biology. What they found in the depths of Lake Vostok didn't just answer questions about Earth. It opened a doorway to understanding alien worlds. And the journey to get there, it nearly killed them. Let me introduce you to Dr. Sergei Bulat, a Russian microbiologist who dedicated 23 years of his life to a single obsession, not fame, not fortune, but the pursuit of a question that haunted him since he first heard whispers of radar data showing liquid water beneath Antarctica's ice sheet. A colleague once asked him why he sacrificed decades in frozen isolation for something that might not even exist. His answer was simple, delivered in that characteristically understated way of true visionaries. Because if life exists there, in absolute darkness, in crushing pressure, in complete isolation for 15 million years, then life can exist anywhere. And if life can exist anywhere, then we are not alone. Sergei wasn't your typical scientist. Born in a small Siberian town where winters regularly hit -50 degrees, he grew up fascinated not by the cold itself, but by what survived within it. As a child, he would chip away at frozen river ice, searching for trapped insects, marveling at how they remained preserved, suspended in time. His grandmother, a woman who lived through Stalin's purges and World War II, taught him a philosophy that would define his career. The world reveals its secrets only to those patient enough to wait, and brave enough to look where others fear to go. That wisdom, born from survival, became his scientific methodology. But Sergei didn't work alone. The Vostok drilling project brought together an international coalition of scientists, each carrying their own piece of expertise, their own reasons for being there. There was Dr. Robin Bell, an American geophysicist whose radar imaging first confirmed the lake's existence. There was Jean-Robert Petit, a French glaciologist who analyzed ice cores that told the story of Earth's climate going back 400,000 years. And there was Valery Lukin, the logistics coordinator who somehow kept everyone alive in conditions that made Mars look hospitable. Together they formed an unlikely family, bound by a dream that most considered madness. The drilling station at Vostok, named after a 19th-century Russian exploration ship, sat at the geomagnetic South Pole, the coldest temperature ever recorded on Earth, -89.2 degrees Celsius. The base itself was a cluster of cramped metal modules buried partially in snow to prevent them from being blown away. Inside, the temperature barely reached a survivable level. Ice formed on the interior walls. Every breath crystallized in the air. The psychological toll was immense. Isolation, darkness for months, the constant mechanical drone of generators. Several team members had to be evacuated over the years due to psychological breakdowns. But Sergei remained year after year, drilling deeper. What they didn't anticipate was the resistance, the mockery, the institutional arrogance they would face from the established scientific community. Enter Dr. Marcus Thornwell, a distinguished Harvard microbiologist, media darling, and the most vocal critic of the Vostok project. Marcus represented everything Sergei was not. Charismatic, politically connected, a man who appeared on television documentaries, who published prolifically, who controlled grant money like a kingmaker. But beneath that polished exterior lay something darker, a man driven by ego, by the need to be right, by an inability to conceive that greatness could emerge from anywhere but the elite institutions he represented. Marcus wasn't simply skeptical. He was hostile. In interview after interview, he dismissed the Vostok project as a vanity exercise in pseudoscience, calling it a waste of international resources chasing a fantasy. At a major conference in Geneva, he stood before hundreds of scientists and said, with characteristic condescension, "Gentlemen and ladies, we are being asked to believe that life, complex microbial life, could exist in conditions we know to be incompatible with biological processes. No sunlight, no nutrient cycling, temperatures near freezing, pressure that would crush most organisms. And these, forgive me, these enthusiasts, suggest that not only does life exist there, but has thrived, isolated for 15 million years. It's not science, it's science fiction, and frankly, it's an embarrassment to legitimate research. The applause was scattered but present. Many in the audience nodded. The scientific establishment, comfortable in its assumptions, wanted to believe Marcus. He made them feel safe in their understanding of the world. Sergei, watching via satellite feed from Antarctica, felt something he rarely experienced. Not anger, but a profound sadness. The sadness of seeing how closed minds could strangle human progress. Marcus had allies. Dr. Evelyn Hartfield, a prominent geochemist from Oxford, publicly stated that the chemical composition of the ice cores suggested no viable pathway for sustained life. Dr. James Kimura from Tokyo University published papers arguing that the pressure alone would denature any proteins, making life biochemically impossible. The criticism wasn't just academic, it was personal. Funding agencies began questioning the project. Politicians asked why taxpayer money was being thrown into a hole in the ice. The pressure to abandon the mission mounted daily. But there was another layer to Marcus's hostility, one that few understood. 20 years earlier, Marcus had proposed his own Antarctic research project, a different lake, a different methodology. It had been rejected in favor of the Vostok mission. That rejection, that public selection of someone else's vision over his own, had festered in him like a wound that never healed. His criticism wasn't about science. It was about vindication, about proving that his rejected proposal had been the right one all along, and that the project chosen instead would fail spectacularly. Back in Antarctica, the drilling continued, millimeter by millimeter, year after year. The process was agonizingly slow. They couldn't use conventional drilling methods because any contamination could destroy what they were searching for. They developed a thermal drill that melted through ice using heated tips, but even that carried risks. What if they introduced surface bacteria? What if the heat damaged potential organisms? Every decision was a balance between progress and preservation. Sergei often stood in the drilling chamber, a massive insulated structure that housed the equipment, listening to the drill's rhythmic grinding, imagining what lay below. His team nicknamed him the Dreamer, but they said it with respect. The years took their toll. Sergei's hair turned completely white by his 45th birthday. Deep lines carved into his face, not just from age but from worry, from the weight of responsibility. He developed a chronic cough from the dry, cold air that never quite went away. His marriage ended, his wife unable to endure the months of separation, the obsession that consumed him. His children grew up with a father who appeared in their lives in bursts, bearing gifts and stories, but never staying long enough to truly be present. The sacrifice was total. And still, Marcus's voice echoed in every grant review, every scientific committee meeting. When will we admit this is a failure? Then came the complications that nearly destroyed everything. At 3,700 meters depth, the drill encountered a layer of ice with different properties. Ice that had been under such pressure for so long that it behaved almost like glass. The drill bit shattered. It took 8 months to manufacture a replacement and transport it to Antarctica. 8 months of watching the project stall while critics circled like vultures. During those months, Sergei received an email from Marcus. Not a professional correspondence, but something crueler. Sergei, old friend, perhaps this is the universe telling you to admit defeat gracefully. Some pursuits are not meant to succeed. There is honor in knowing when to stop. The patronizing tone, the false friendship, the arrogant presumption, it ignited something in Sergei. Not rage, but a crystalline determination. When drilling resumed, they made it another 100 meters before disaster struck. A pressure bubble in the ice caused a catastrophic drill jam. The bit was stuck, frozen in place 3,800 meters down, with 400 meters still to go. Engineers said it was unrecoverable, that they would have to abandon the shaft and start over, perhaps at a different location entirely, which could take another decade. The team was devastated. Valery, the logistics coordinator, found Sergei sitting alone in the observation module, staring out at the endless white expanse, tears frozen on his cheeks. "Is this it?" Valery asked quietly. Sergei was silent for a long moment. Then he said something that became legendary among the remaining team. "Ice is patient, ice is ancient. Ice does not care about our timelines or our egos, but ice can also be understood. We are not giving up. We're going to think like the ice." What followed was an engineering miracle born from desperation. Sergei proposed something that had never been attempted, using a combination of thermal and acoustic resonance to gradually loosen the drill without breaking it or contaminating the lake below. The acoustic method, involved sending specific sound frequencies through the ice, vibrations calculated to fracture the ice, gripping the drill while leaving the drill itself intact. It was theoretical. It was untested. But Sergei had spent 2 decades studying the acoustic properties of different ice layers, data most scientists considered trivial. Now, that trivial data became their salvation. It took 3 months of constant, delicate adjustments, 3 months of 18-hour days, of calculations and recalculations, of tiny incremental movements. The international team watched, breathless, as centimeter by centimeter the drill began to move. And then, one morning in February 2012, breakthrough. The drill punched through the final meters of ice and entered the liquid water of Lake Vostok. The tension in the drilling chamber was electric. Silence. Then an eruption of celebration. Scientists hugging, crying, shouting in 4 different languages. Sergei stood apart, his hand on the drilling control panel, his eyes closed, overwhelmed. But the real work was just beginning. They deployed specialized sampling equipment, tools designed to extract water without contamination. The first samples came up in sealed containers, water that had been isolated from Earth's surface since before modern humans existed, since before the last great ice age, since the Miocene epoch, when the continents themselves were still shifting into their current positions. Under microscopic examination in the base's cramped laboratory, they found what everyone said was impossible. Life. Not fossil remains. Not chemical traces. But living, metabolically active microorganisms. The creatures were unlike anything in biological databases. Extremophiles that had adapted to conditions so severe, they seemed alien. They metabolized compounds most life couldn't touch. They reproduced in ways that defied standard biological models. They existed in a state of suspended animation, slowing their metabolic processes to near zero, then reviving when conditions allowed. The genetic analysis revealed something even more staggering. These organisms had been evolving independently for 15 million years, developing genetic sequences that had no match to any known surface life. They were Earth life. But they had taken a completely separate evolutionary path. They were living proof that life doesn't need sunlight, doesn't need the surface world, doesn't need anything we assumed was essential. Life, they proved, was far more resilient, far more creative, far more inevitable than anyone imagined. The data was checked, rechecked, verified by independent laboratories across 3 continents. There was no contamination, no mistakes, no alternative explanation. Lake Vostok harbored a thriving, isolated, ancient ecosystem. When the results were published in the journal Science, the impact was seismic. Media exploded. Headlines screamed about alien life on Earth. NASA immediately began referencing the discovery in discussions about Europa, Jupiter's ice-covered moon, and Enceladus, Saturn's moon with subsurface oceans. If life could exist in Lake Vostok, it could exist in the cosmic oceans hidden beneath ice throughout the solar system. And Marcus? Marcus went silent. For weeks he made no public statements, but then he did something that shocked the scientific community. He published a response article, but not the gracious admission of error people expected. Instead he doubled down, arguing that the findings were still preliminary, that long-term viability hadn't been proven, that the organisms might be remnants clinging to existence rather than a thriving ecosystem. He appeared on news programs, his smile forced, his explanations increasingly strained. Yes, they found microorganisms, but we must be cautious about overselling this discovery. The conditions in Lake Vostok are extreme, marginal for life, and we don't yet know if what they found represents a sustainable ecosystem or merely survivors. The scientific community reacted with disbelief. Even Marcos's allies distanced themselves. Dr. Hartfield from Oxford published her own statement. While I was initially skeptical, the evidence from Lake Vostok is compelling and expands our understanding of life's possibilities. Science progresses when we adjust our views to accommodate new evidence. But Marcus couldn't. His identity, his reputation, his entire career had been built on being the authority, the one who knew, the gatekeeper of legitimate science. Admitting he had been wrong, completely and fundamentally wrong, would shatter that identity. So he clung to increasingly desperate arguments, his credibility eroding with each interview. Then Sergei did something that no one anticipated. He requested a joint symposium, inviting Marcus to Antarctica to see the research firsthand, to examine the organisms himself, to meet the team, to understand the methodology. The invitation was public, posted on the project's website, covered by science media. Dr. Thornwell, you have been our most vocal critic for 2 decades. You have questioned our methods, our findings, our integrity. I invite you to come to Vostok Station. Examine everything. If you find flaws, expose them. If you find fraud, reveal it. But come with open eyes and an open mind. Come as a scientist, not as a critic. Because ultimately we serve the same goal: understanding truth. The challenge was brilliant. Humble yet devastating. If Marcus refused, he would appear afraid of confronting evidence. If he accepted, he would have to face his own wrongness in the most undeniable way possible. The scientific world watched, waiting. Marcus was trapped. He accepted, releasing a terse statement. I appreciate Dr. Bulat's invitation and look forward to a thorough examination of the data and methodologies. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and I intend to ensure that standard is met. The arrival of Marcus Thornwell at Vostok Station was tense. He emerged from the transport plane wrapped in cold weather gear, his expression unreadable behind goggles and a balaclava. Sergei met him at the entrance to the base, extending a gloved hand. Welcome to Vostok, Marcus. Thank you for coming. Marcus hesitated before shaking his hand. Let's see what you've actually found, Sergei. The words were cold, professional, guarded. For 3 days, Marcus examined everything. The drilling logs, the contamination protocols, the water samples, the microscopic slides, the genetic sequencing data. The team gave him complete access, answered every question, challenged none of his skepticism. They were patient, methodical, letting the evidence speak. Sergei watched Marcus work, seeing something he hadn't expected: genuine intellectual rigor. Whatever his flaws, Marcus was a skilled scientist when he allowed himself to be. But Sergei also saw something else: the way Marcus's hands trembled slightly when examining the organisms, the way his breath caught when reviewing the genetic data, the gradual crumbling of defensive certainty. On the 4th evening, in the cramped common area where the team gathered for meals, Marcus sat across from Sergei, a cup of tea steaming between them. The room was quiet except for the ever-present hum of generators. Marcus spoke first, his voice barely above a whisper. It's real. Everything you've claimed. It's all real. Sergei nodded slowly. Yes, it is. Marcus closed his eyes, and when he opened them, they glistened with something that might have been tears, though in that cold, dry air, tears froze before they could fall. I've spent 20 years trying to destroy this project. 20 years undermining you, questioning you, attacking you. Not because the science was bad, but because I couldn't accept that someone else had the vision I didn't. That someone chose your idea over mine. I've been so wrong. Not just scientifically, but morally. I let ego poison science, and I'm sorry doesn't even begin to cover it. The silence that followed was profound. The other team members, scattered around the room, had stopped their conversations, sensing the weight of the moment. Sergei leaned forward, his weathered face gentle. Marcus, do you know why I invited you here? Not to humiliate you, not to claim victory, but because you're a brilliant scientist whose talents have been wasted on defending the wrong position. The discovery we've made here is just the beginning. We've found life in one lake. There are hundreds of subglacial lakes in Antarctica alone. Every single one might harbor unique ecosystems. And beyond that, the implications for astrobiology, for space exploration, for understanding life's potential throughout the universe, this work will take generations. I invited you here because we need you. Not the critic, but the scientist. The one with the expertise to take this further. I'm offering you a place on this team, Marcus. If you want it. The offer hung in the air. Impossible, generous, transformative. Marcus stared at Sergei, disbelief and hope warring on his face. Why? After everything I've done. Why would you? Sergei interrupted gently. Because holding grudges is a luxury we can't afford. Because science isn't about individual glory. It's about collective understanding. Because I've made mistakes too. Sacrificed relationships. Missed my children's lives. Paid terrible prices for this obsession. I understand what drives us, and I understand what corrupts us. You were wrong, Marcus. But you're here now, willing to see truth. That's what matters. That's what science is. Not being right always, but being willing to change when evidence demands it. Marcus broke then, the armor of arrogance shattering completely. He wept, shoulders shaking, not from cold, but from the release of 20 years of bitterness and ego and wasted brilliance. The team, those Patient scientists who had endured his criticism didn't mock or gloat. Instead, they gathered around, hands on his shoulders, offering the compassion that only those who've struggled together in impossible conditions can offer. Valery, the logistics coordinator, said what they were all thinking. "Welcome to Vostok, Marcos. Welcome home." But the story doesn't end with one man's redemption. It expands, like ripples on the surface of an ancient lake. In the weeks that followed, Marcos became one of the project's most passionate advocates. He used his media connections, his institutional prestige, not to tear down, but to build up. He secured funding that had been impossible to obtain before. He recruited young scientists, brilliant minds who had been discouraged from risky research. He co-authored papers with Sergei that became foundational texts in extremophile biology. The transformation was total and genuine. The discovery at Lake Vostok triggered a revolution in astrobiology. NASA's Europa Clipper mission, designed to study Jupiter's ice-covered moon, directly cited the Vostok findings as justification for the mission's existence. The European Space Agency accelerated plans for missions to Enceladus. Private space companies began investing in technologies to drill through extraterrestrial ice. The question was no longer, could life exist in these environments, but when will we find it? Sergei and Marcus, once adversaries, became the faces of this new frontier, appearing together at conferences. Their partnership a symbol of what science could achieve when ego surrendered to evidence. But perhaps the most profound impact happened quietly, in laboratories and classrooms around the world. Students who had been taught that life required specific, narrow conditions learned that life was far more adaptable than anyone imagined. Researchers who had been discouraged from pursuing unconventional hypotheses found courage in Sergei's perseverance. Scientists who had let ego drive their work saw in Marcus's transformation the possibility of redemption, the reminder that being wrong isn't failure. It's the necessary step toward being right. The human story behind the scientific discovery became as important as the discovery itself. Sergei returned to his family, or what remained of it. His children, now adults, had watched his journey with a mixture of pride and resentment. But when he sat with them and shared not just the triumph, but the cost, the loneliness, the doubt, the fear, something shifted. His daughter told him, "Dad, you taught us that some things are worth sacrificing for. But you also taught us by your absence that we have to choose carefully what those things are. You found life in impossible places. Now find life here, with us." And Sergei, the man who had spent decades staring into ice, learned to look into the eyes of his children and truly see them. The exploration of inner worlds, he discovered, required the same courage as exploring outer ones. The Vostok base continues its work. New teams cycle through, building on the foundation Sergei's persistence created. They've discovered not just one type of organism, but dozens, an entire ecosystem with predator-prey relationships, symbiosis, competition, all the complexity of surface life compressed into a dark, cold, isolated world. They found organisms that communicate chemically, that form primitive cooperative structures, that exhibit behaviors, suggesting rudimentary problem-solving. Life, it turns out, doesn't just survive in extreme conditions. It thrives. It innovates. It finds ways. And what does this mean for us? Sitting here, safe in our normal temperatures, surrounded by sunlight and oxygen and all the things we assume life requires. It means that life is more tenacious than we dared hope. It means that the universe, cold and vast and seemingly hostile, might be teeming with life in places we never thought to look. It means that beneath the ice of distant moons, in the chemical soups of exoplanets, in environments that seem utterly alien, life might be waiting, evolving, thriving. We are not alone. Not because aliens have visited us, but because life itself is the universe's most persistent, most inevitable, most extraordinary phenomenon. But beyond the science, beyond the implications for space exploration, there's a deeper lesson here, one about human nature, about the barriers we create, about the transformation. That's possible when we choose compassion over pride. Sergei could have spent his life bitter about the criticism, about the obstacles. Marcus could have died clinging to his wrongness, defending his ego to the end. But instead, both men chose differently. Sergei chose forgiveness. Marcus chose humility. And in those choices, they created something more valuable than any scientific discovery. They proved that humans, like life itself, can adapt, can transform, can flourish in the most unlikely conditions. So here's what I want you to take away from this story. First, persistence in the face of overwhelming skepticism isn't stubbornness, it's vision. If it's grounded in evidence and openness to being wrong, Sergei persisted not because he refused to hear criticism, but because he followed the data wherever it led. Second, being wrong isn't the end of your credibility. How you handle being wrong defines your character. Marcus's redemption came not from never making mistakes, but from having the courage to admit them and change. Third, the universe rewards humility. Nature doesn't care about our assumptions or our egos. It simply is. The scientists who make the greatest discoveries are often those willing to question everything, including themselves. And finally, life is everywhere, not just biologically, but metaphorically. In the frozen wasteland of broken relationships, in the darkness of professional rivalry, in the crushing pressure of public failure, life, meaning, connection, redemption can emerge if we're willing to drill through our own barriers. If this story moved you, if it challenged you, if it made you think differently about life, about science, about second chances, do me a favor, hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear about persistence, about forgiveness, about the extraordinary hidden in the ordinary. Drop a comment telling me what surprised you most about this discovery, or about a time when you had to admit you were wrong and it changed your life. And subscribe to this channel because stories like this, stories about human courage and scientific wonder and the endless surprises of our universe, these are the stories I live to tell. The ice still covers Lake Vostok, kilometers thick, ancient beyond measure. But now we know what lies beneath. Not just water and microorganisms, but possibility. The possibility that life transcends our limitations, our definitions, our understanding. The possibility that, in the darkest, coldest, most isolated corners of existence, life persists, transforms, and ultimately thrives, just like us, just like you. Thank you for watching. Now go out there and find your own Lake Vostok, that impossible dream buried beneath layers of doubt and fear, and drill through. Because on the other side of impossible lies everything.